Happy Sabbath. We're approaching into a special time. Passover begins at the end of March. It's early. We really only have 2.5 months to prepare to renew our covenant. And the more I get into the scriptures about it, the more it is very hard for us to act on our own. Because we just don't know what the heck to do. None of us. And if any of us think we do, and if that doesn't include directly God's assistance, we're fooling ourselves. I'm going to turn to Jeremiah 17 to illustrate my point of what I'm trying to convey. Jeremiah chapter 17, and starting in verse 5. And this you should pay special attention to. These aren't my words. These are words that were inspired thousands of years ago to be written down. But you weigh them and you decide for yourself. It says, "This is what the Lord says," so there can be no doubt who is speaking to you. "Cursed is the one who trusts in man." What does that mean? "Who depends on the flesh for his strength, and whose heart turns away from the Lord." This is what he'll be like. This is what will happen to them. It will be like a bush in the wastelands. He will not see prosperity when it comes. He will dwell in the parched places of the desert, in a salt land where no one lives. But blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord. This is obviously speaking metaphorically. Whose confidence is in him. He will be, this man or woman will be, like a tree that's been planted right by the water, that sends out its roots by the stream. It does not fear when the heat comes. Its leaves are always green, and it has no worries in a year of drought, and never fails to bear fruit. Now here's something very amazing, and it's been quoted a lot. The heart, your heart, is deceitful above all things, and it's beyond any cure. Who can understand it? Who can understand the way we feel and what motivates us? And then he says, "I, the Lord, search the heart, and I examine the mind, to reward a man according to his conduct, according to what his deeds deserve." Now, if that doesn't tell you so much about the mechanics in the spirit world, if it doesn't tell you so much about yourself, that in us is a heart, and that heart has a particular nature that drives it. But that nature, it tends to lead us down the road of destruction, and we don't even know it. And once we're there, we find ourselves that we're not happy. We don't know what sustains and fulfills us. Well, this same verse tells you what sustains and fulfills you. So if you go to Proverbs 3, it ties in with these verses. Proverbs chapter 3 and verse 5. Right? This ties into what we just read, and it expands our knowledge more of what kind of state we want to reside in. Proverbs 3 and verse 5. And it says here, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding." What does that mean? Lean not on your own understanding. So what even you know and have confirmed to you, you really always have to be suspicious or to hold to be suspect. Because even what we know for sure can still throw us into confusion, and we could be wrong. "In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight." So without God guiding us in this world, we're physical human beings. We just don't have what it takes to navigate this on our own. We need God to help us to navigate this world on to be able to get through these forces that work against us. Or we're toast. We cannot stand. It's very clear here. In all your ways acknowledge Him. That is the prerequisite. And then He will make your path straight. He'll help you. He'll help you. He'll help you put one foot properly in front of the other. And He'll protect that heart. We're going to read more scriptures about it. He knows how you feel. He knows if you're in anguish. But He has certain prerequisites that have to be met first. So, in Isaiah chapter 58, this is primarily where we're going to stay for a little bit. And in verse 1, this is an instruction to those whose job it is. In Isaiah 58 verse 1 it says, "Shout it aloud, do not hold back. Raise your voice like a trumpet. Declare to my people their rebellion, and to the house of Jacob their sins." Show them where they've done wrong. Show them how they have wronged God. And years ago, if you're familiar, there was a great teacher who always used to say this very saying. Show them their sins. Spare not. Lift up your voice. And he did. Verse 2, "For day after day," and this is very strange, "for day after day they seek me out." What? "They seem eager to know my ways, as if they were a nation that does what is right, and has not forsaken the commands of its God." So here we see a situation that's very conflictual. They seem eager to know Him. They call upon His name, and yet they don't obey His commands. This was written a long time before Jesus Christ was even born. Let's look into that a little bit more. Let's fast forward, because the same spirit and the same idle dwelling place that Christians can find themselves locked into is still around to this day. Just as much as it was around in Isaiah. They seem eager to know me. For day after day they seek me out. They call my name. They seem eager to know my ways, as if they were a nation that does what is right. As if they had not already forsaken the commands of its God. In other words, it's a huge hypocrisy. So when you go to James chapter 1 and verse 22, this is incredible. James was a very blunt man. And he says in verse 22, "Do not merely listen to the word, and so deceive yourselves." There's a way that we can deceive ourselves. Do what it says. Don't just listen to it. Anyone who listens to the word, but he does not do what it says, well, he's like a man who looks at his face in a mirror. And even after just looking at himself, he goes away and he immediately forgets what he looks like. But the man who looks intently, with purpose, because he knows he can't trust himself, the man who looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom. Freedom from what? Freedom from being trapped by your own mind, because you're leaning on your own understanding. You're putting the faith in the flesh. But the man who looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues to do this, you have to persevere. You have to remind yourself, like my brother says, you got to check your heart every day in all situations. You have to weigh that heart, because it's deceitful, like we just read. But the man who looks intently, not forgetting what he has heard, but doing it, he will be blessed in what he does. If anyone considers himself religious and spiritual, and yet you do not keep a tight rein on your tongue, he deceives himself, and his religion is worthless. How about that? Wow. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this. In other words, if you want to call on His name for real, this is what you got to do. To look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. Because on a daily basis, we're bombarded by forces that are much more powerful than us. And they can have an effect, so we have to put mechanisms in place that help us keep our hearts clean, or we're going to run into a problem. So Luke 6, if you just go back to Luke 6 here, these are words of Christ. So who could deny those words? No one. If they do, they're finished. So Luke chapter 6 and verse 46, right? We've read this many times, but it's important to read what Jesus said. Jesus said in verse 46, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and you do not do what I say? I will show you what that person is like, the one that comes to me and hears my words and puts them into practice. He is like a man building a house who dug down deep and laid the foundation on rock. So when a flood came, the torrent struck, but the torrent could not shake it, because it was well built on the rock after he dug down deep. But the one who hears my words and does not put them into practice, he is like a man who built a house on the ground without any foundation. And the moment the torrent struck, that house, it collapsed and its destruction was complete." That's what Christ said. With his own mouth, that's what he told them. Only when we are doing in our lives and putting into place can our faith be realized. By our own decisions, we choose to walk the narrow path on a daily basis. And this path is a pathway to mastery. And this has been required right from the beginning. This isn't something new. Just like it said in Leviticus to love your neighbor as yourself. We've heard that from the beginning. But now that meant so much more, and had so much more in its capacity to deliver. But going back to Genesis chapter 4, I can turn there for you real quick. We've read this many times. I just wanted to remind you of it. Genesis chapter 4, and verse 7. God is conversing with Cain. He is being merciful. He's trying to get Cain to change his ways, because God knows where it's heading. And this is the ingredients. This is the formula that God presents before him. The same formula that's in front of us. If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door, and it desires to have you, but you must master it. That's our life's quest. We're on a mission to master ourselves. And it's hard. With so much emotional investment that we place in our life. And life, isn't gentle with some of us. It can really beat on us hard. And that's why really only our God can heal us. But we have to be doers of his word. And I'll read scriptures that confirm that once you start doing what he's asking you to do, which isn't very hard, and you surrender your heart to him, and you humble yourself, he's going to lift you up. He's going to heal you. He's going to repair you. You're going to be whole. You're going to be complete. He's going to give you a peace and a joy that springs up from within you, that no man or no human being or no counselor or nobody else can give you. He's going to plant seeds in you. But like God said, if you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you don't do the right thing, if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. And there are some people, like our opening prayer indicated today, they're completely lost in sin. And that's where they want to be. They don't want to master nothing. They've given into it, and they've allowed themselves to be taken fully captive by it. And then you see now the results that we see today. And that's not good. That cannot spell anything positive for our world, for our future as a society. And we know that. So, and then if we go to Romans, so we know that we've got to enter into a process of doing, and by resisting the devil, doing the right thing, even with getting resistance and being tempted, we come to a point where we've been able to master ourselves and to master those things that rage inside of us. And believe me, I'm no different than anybody else. This is a requirement for everyone. And it's hard. I know it's hard because, I've had my own battles. It's tough. The heart is deceitful above all things. We always think that we're right. And there's sometimes when we're not right, and we need to understand and admit that. But there are times when we are right, and we are standing up for the right thing, and we need to persevere with that as well. Romans chapter 2, verse 13. And this is Paul confirming the doing. And this man, people use a lot of his scriptures, to refute or to put away the fact that we need to be doers of good work. They don't qualify us. The gift of God is eternal life, but they're definitely a prerequisite for any Christian, as James pointed out. Don't just be hearers of the word, be doers. You have to. You have to. So Paul, in verse 13, he says, "For it is not those who hear the law who are righteous in God's sight, but it is those who obey or do the law who will be declared righteous." So much for using Paul's scriptures, to put away the requirements of the law. Paul says in his own words, but it is those who obey the law who will be declared righteous. Just like Abraham had to obey the law, and so did Isaac and Jacob, and then subsequently Joseph. That same graduacy was measured back to those Pharisees that claimed that they were Abraham's seed. If you be Abraham's seed, then you would do the things he did. He did. You would do the things that he did. He obeyed and performed the law. You look at Job. Job was the same way. Widows and orphans were not in any kind of need when he was around. The stranger had a place to stay for as long as he liked, and a meal put in front of him. You could read that in Job. That was what kind of man he was. He was a doer. And the churches of God need a lot more doers, because they can inspire others. They can inspire others to do. So back to Isaiah 58. Right? So there's the answer, For day after day they seek me out. With their mouths they seem eager to know my ways. And then he says right away against it, as if they were a nation that does what is right, when they're not. And has not forsaken the commandments of its God, when they have. They don't obey my commands. And then he says, they ask me for just decisions. And they seem eager for God to come near them. This is how they seem, but it's a lie. And that's what God is referring to. They seem like they want to know me. They seem like they want fair decisions and my involvement in their life, but it's the furthest thing from them. I'm going to Isaiah 29. And here God describes exactly what he means. He describes exactly what he means. And we still see this today. I believe all of us have been guilty of this at one point or another. And if we are currently, we need to wake up. We need to shake ourselves up out of it. Isaiah chapter 29 and verse 13. There can be no doubt what God is meaning here. So verse 13, it says, the Lord says, so you know who's speaking, these people come near to me with their mouth, and they honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They don't really want to obey me. Their worship of me is made up of only rules taught by men. That's what God says. It even says right at the beginning of the verse, the Lord says. You honor me with your mouth. It's just talk. You're living in a delusion or a deluded state. You got the appearance of someone who wants me to come near and who says, Lord, Lord. You know who I am, and yet your hearts are far from me. You don't want to do anything I command you to do or I ask you to do. 2 Timothy. Now there's a saturation point, right, that is coming when this type of attitude is very prevalent in the churches. With those that should know better, with those that should have understanding. The attitude is there. And you know, you need to ask yourself while I'm reading this, can you see anything in there about you? Can you see anything in there that you can identify with? If so, you need to change it, all of us. Because we're supposed to be preparing ourselves now for the Passover. This is coming, and it's very serious, especially for those that know. So verse 1 of chapter 3. But mark this. If you're wise, take a special note of this. But mark this. There will be terrible times in the last days. People will be lovers of themselves. They will be lovers of money. They will be boastful. They will be proud. They will be abusive. They will be disobedient to their parents. They will be ungrateful. They will be unholy. They will be without love. And we know right out of the mouth of Jesus Christ in Matthew 24. He said, because the days are evil, and because of the increase in wickedness, the heart of most will grow cold. Again, this is remarking to the last days and terrible times. They will be without love. They will be unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of the good, treacherous, duplicitous, backstabbers, rash, conceited, full of themselves, full of vanity, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. Now here is something astounding. Having a form of godliness, after all of that, having a form of godliness, but denying its power to govern the very things that they've allowed to grow inside them. And then when I read this list, I can see some stuff that I need to tune up on. If you can read this list and you can't see anything that you display in your life or have displayed in your life, then you got a problem. You're delusional. So we who have understanding and who worship God and call upon His name, we got to make sure that we're clean as much as we can. And like my brother says, we employ this mechanism as much as we can. We have to at least do that much. God will do the rest because of our willingness and because of our awareness of His requirements. He'll do the rest. He has to because we can't. The heart is deceitful above all things. It's beyond cure. It has to be miraculously cured. But we understand also from Paul's writings that our natural mind, it's against God. It's an enmity to God. It doesn't want to hear about God. That's a pain. This is our natural mind. The mind has to be renewed. Otherwise, they don't want it. That's how we're born into this world. It's shocking, but that's very true. If you want to break up a crowd, go into the crowd and start talking about Jesus. That conversation will break up very quick, especially if they're worldly people. If they're not worldly people, well, they'll probably want to talk about it. But for the most part, people don't want to hear about it. But imagine that, having a form of godliness. So there's a counterfeit. These people are fooling themselves. If they could actually have all of that living inside of them, but have a form of godliness over top of it, like icing on a cake, Like Christ said, and John the Baptist said, whitewashed tombs. Their ways lead to death. Their ways lead to the corruption of themselves and others under the guise of religion. That's scary. That's really scary. Having a form of godliness but denying its power have nothing to do with them because they'll be infectious to you. Their rotten attitude and their state of being, which is living a lie, and being able to insert God anywhere in to those type of factors that they exhibit in their life, if they can do that, then they've compromised on a level that's inexplicable. If they can do that, what else are they capable of? So we got to make sure that we're sober-minded. We got to make sure that we are paying attention and we're trying to do the best we can. And that's why God has given us our brothers, so that they sometimes can show us, hey, did you think about that? Have you considered this? Have you looked at that? And they can really help us. But that's why we have them. We help them, they help us. It's iron sharpening iron. Whatever we supply to them is the very thing they need. And the very thing they supply to us is what we need, and we need to understand that. So back to verse 3. So imagine that. We're going all the way from Isaiah 29, thousands of years before, talking about how they worship him with their lips, but their hearts are far from him. We go all the way fast forward into 2 Timothy. And he's talking about perilous times in the last days. People are absolute scoundrels, and yet they say they follow Jesus Christ and they follow God. Tie that in with Matthew 24, where Christ says, many will come in my name, saying that I am the Christ. They'll agree, but they will deceive many. Their conduct, what they perform, is infectious. And we battle against it, not only in ourselves from it taking root, but also externally against others that would try to live this way and not be confronted. Well, they will be. They will be by the Almighty. So verse 3 in Isaiah 58, and here's something amazing. They say to God, they say to their God, why have we fasted, they say, and you have not seen it? Imagine the cheekiness, the obstinance. And then they say to him, why have we humbled ourselves and you have not noticed? Imagine how that sounds. Then don't forget to whom they're speaking to. Again, words of Christ. If you go into Matthew 7, Matthew chapter 7, Christ spoke to this type of attitude. This type of attitude is still around to this day. It's amazing what some brothers will do to other brothers, and even deny the words of Jesus Christ in order to execute it. We've seen that firsthand. It's amazing how they justify these things to themselves. So in Matthew 7 and verse 15, this is very familiar to us. But again, I'm speaking to exactly the attitude that was back then. The same attitude is in front of Jesus Christ in his day. The same attitude is here to this day as well. So there's a spirit behind this. He says, watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly, inside of them, they are ferocious wolves. By their fruit, you will recognize them. And then he asks you to employ a little common sense. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes? No. Or figs from thistles? Of course not. Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit. A good tree or a good person cannot bear bad fruit. And a bad tree or a bad person who's completely given over to being bad cannot bear good fruit. Right? A fig can't come from a thistle. Grapes cannot come from thorn bushes. That's how impossible it is. And then he goes on, and my point is further here. He goes on to say this. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Now, farmers understand that. Well, he's talking about human beings. Thus, by their fruit, you will recognize them. And is that ever true? Then he says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only he who does the will of my Father. You have to be doers. Who is in heaven. And then he says, many will say to me on that day, in these perilous times, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and perform many miracles? The same attitude. And then I will tell them plainly, so they understand plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. If you're doing good, you can't do bad. If you're doing bad, you will not do good. You can't pick grapes from a thorn bush. If you're a person that's motivated to do something, because you will be doing something, either following your own desires and being evil and consumed by all of those things we read in 2 Timothy chapter 3, or you're transplanting those natural things that are inside of you that you're born with to serve yourself, to worship in this way of get. You're transplanting that. You're allowing God in to do it. Now, you can bear fruit. Because now you are something that has been fashioned to bear that fruit. And you've been fashioned by God. You've allowed Him to fashion you by your obedience. And that's so important. These are all simple things. But look at the attitude here. We just read words of Christ several centuries and centuries later when He stood on this earth. The same attitude. These people had long died. And He was dealing with the same thing. That's a spirit. That's a spirit behind that. That's why it's here, centuries later, it's here today. It's not gone anywhere. It's not gone anywhere. It's working out. The devil has a work, and that's why Jesus Christ came, to destroy that work. And He did. But while this world still rolls on to the last hour, until the Father says it's time, all of this is getting played out to a climax, to a saturation point. That's why it said, take note, mark this, there will be perilous times in the last days, times that you have never heard about, times that you couldn't even read about in any history book. But we're experiential and we're sleeping. We don't realize hardship until it comes and lands right on our doorstep. And then when we're standing in it, we go, oh, then we realize. So you can see the same attitude. In verse 3 of Isaiah 58, they say, why have we fasted? And you did not see it. They're speaking to their God. Why have we humbled ourselves? And you did not notice. So God, instead of just destroying them for their insolence, because He's a God of love and a God that serves, He says this. In the latter part of verse 3, He says, and yet, on the day of your fasting, you do as you please. You're worshiping me with your lips. Your heart's not there. You do as you please. And you exploit all your workers. Your fasting ends in quarreling and strife, and in striking each other with wicked fists. You cannot fast as you do today, and expect your voice to be heard on high. And now when you look at that in the reverse, if you do the right thing, your voice can be heard on high. Daniel experienced that. Daniel was told directly by the angel, from the first day that you decided to humble yourself, your words were heard in heaven. Imagine that, having a voice that could extend to that place. But it's because only by your doing. So God says, you cannot fast as you do today and expect your voice to be heard on high. Is this the kind of fast that I have chosen? only a day for a man to humble himself? Is it only for bowing one's head like a reed, and for lying on sackcloth and ashes? Is that what you call a fast? Is that what you call a fast? If you go to Luke real quick, I'll turn there, I can read it, it's only one verse. Luke chapter 6. At verse 45, we were just here. The good man brings good things out of the good that's stored up in his heart. This is what I was trying to describe. You've gotten out of the way, you've obeyed God's commands, and now you're allowing him to fashion you, to make you, to finish creating you. The good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart, and the evil man brings things out of the evil stored up in his heart. And here is something that is amazing. For out of the overflow of his heart, his mouth speaks. And to some of us, that's very compelling and condemning. And I'm not thinking about anyone else but myself. Wow, talk about the truth and the light of the truth. That does cut like a double-edged sword. Wow. And then if you look at Proverbs, I'll read it out. It's only one verse. Proverbs chapter 27, I'm going to read from. And it's at verse 19 of chapter 27. It says, as water reflects the face, so a man's heart reflects the man. And this ties into what Christ said. By their fruits you will know them. Luke 6, for out of the overflow of what he stored in his heart, the mouth speaks. Wow. Wow. Again, those are not my words. Those are the words of Jesus Christ. Those are the words of our God. So they actually have the nerve to tell them, you didn't notice what we did. Like we read, we drove out demons in your name. We did miracles in your name. Same attitude, same spirit, same delusional effects. Their hearts were far from their God. They figured, well, that's just good enough. And there's a way that we can reside in captivity like that. And we know that there's many churches of God that are there right now. They shuffle in and shuffle out week after week. Their religion is reserved for a weekend. You try to contact them during the week. I've been there. And they are like, why are you phoning me? I'll see you on Saturday. We've all been there. But it's time to wake up from there now. It's time to wake up. It's time to have the body come into full effect. Like my brother says, the body of Christ has to function. And the only way that it can do it is if it wakes up. And it's time now. These Passovers and these holy days that we're now experiencing, like Paul said, all the more as we head to the end, we need to be very strict because perilous times are coming. These are times when our hearts are being weighed and we're being judged. It's not going to be good. So we need to respect where we are standing and we need to wake up. The body of Christ has to function, and it will. So verse 6 of Isaiah 58. This is what God is trying to teach you about what he requires. This isn't my teaching. This is your God's teaching. And it says in verse 6, is not this the kind of fasting that I have chosen? And here he goes. To loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke of control or bondage. Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? These are things that you have to do. When you see the naked, to clothe him, and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood. Then your light will break forth like the dawn. In other words, you will be healed by these things if you do them. And your healing will appear quickly, or will quickly appear. Your healing, the healing of your heart, the healing of your mind, the healing of your body. And then your righteousness will go before you. And the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Wow. And then you will call, and the Lord will answer you. You will cry for help, and he will say, here I am. Here I am to help you. Here I am to heal you. Here I am at your back to make you stand. Wow. If that is a loving and incredible, I don't know what is, it's incredible. What an incredible promise. You know, just, it's incredible love. It's no words to describe it other than we need to take him at his word. And we need to do those things. And Jesus, he reminded the Pharisees of those very same words. Jesus read Hosea 6. He also read Isaiah 58. He inspired Isaiah 58. But while he was a human, he still had to learn, just like any one of us had to learn. You have to learn what you need to obey. So he read Isaiah 58. He read Hosea 6. I'm going to read Hosea 6, verse 6. Because right out of his mouth, he quoted Isaiah. He quoted Hosea to these Pharisees. And here's what he quoted. In chapter 6, verse 6, Hosea was inspired to write, "For I desire mercy, not sacrifice, and acknowledgement of God rather than burnt offerings." In other words, I want your heart, not your mouth, not your practice, not you just shuffling in and shuffling out and going through the motions. I want your heart in it. Go to Matthew 9. Matthew chapter 9. And verse 12. Jesus said, actually, let's back it up to verse 10 to give it more context. So chapter 9 of Matthew, verse 10. It says, while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners, they came and they ate with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, they didn't ask him, but they asked his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners and garbage?" On hearing this, Jesus said, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means, you Pharisees. I desire mercy, not sacrifice." And he quoted that right from Hosea. "For I have come to call the righteous. For I have not come to call the righteous or the self-righteous, but I have come to call sinners." Psalm 19. Now, as we head to this important time, there is a lot that we could be learning, because we're not the only ones who had to prepare our hearts. We have a prime example in Psalms and in other scriptures of men that were preparing their hearts before God. They had to enter into the same process that we are required. Here, I'll read it, and you can see for yourselves. Right? So, Psalm 19, and starting in verse 1, I'm just going to try to give it more background here. The heavens declare the glory of God. Okay? And the skies proclaim the work of his hands. Remember that. How does it do that? Is this just poetry? How does it do that? No, he's talking literally. Day after day, they pour forth their speech. Day after day that you wake up and observe, they give a testimony to you. Night after night, they display knowledge. There is no speech or language where their voice is not heard. It is the language of observation. It is the language of having intellect, having the capacity to use it, and in what presence you are standing. What are you witnessing? What are you seeing on a daily basis? Their voice goes out into all the earth. Their words of testimony to the ends of the world. Okay? Now what does that mean? Well, Paul understood it this way. Let's go to Romans. And Paul basically put a voice to some of that which was the testimony of what is extant, of what is viewable, of what is visible. And the more science looks into space, the more that they look at these small particles, they look far and they look near, they find God everywhere they go. They find things that they just can't explain. They even have a particle called the God particle, and they know that it holds all matter together. From my layman's understanding, that's what I've been led to believe. Romans chapter 1, verse 18. Paul gives this very scripture, right? Words. So when you read Romans 1 and then you read this, you'll understand, or you should understand. Here's Paul's take on it. Verse 18. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and the wickedness of men. Why? Who suppress the truth by their wickedness. Since what may be known about God is plain to them. It's no mystery. Because God has made it plain to them. And verse 20. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, this is talking about what David was referencing. Their speech goes forth day after day. Night after night, they display knowledge. The very physical things that are around you should teach you. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without an excuse. You can't get it any more clearer than that. That's what David understood centuries before. He knew who made these things. Paul is saying it is so obvious and so plain, and God has made it plain, that the only reason why it isn't proclaimed and it isn't common knowledge, and there's all these other things that are thrown into the way of how we came to be, and how the earth came to be, and how the universe came to be, that they're suppressing it, and that it's complete wickedness. Because God has made it very plain that this is created, that this is fashioned. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies, in Psalm 19, the skies proclaim the work of his hands. That's what Paul was saying. Since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without an excuse. David was describing the same thing. Night after night, they display knowledge. There is no speech or language where their voice is not heard. You can't use that as an excuse, because the language that it's speaking is the language of observation. It is the language of experience. Their voice goes out into all the earth, it reaches every corner. Everyone can look up into the heavens. Everyone can see these things. The seasons come in due course. The sun set and rise. Now we know even more, even just with the layman's knowledge, that the earth is on a particular axis, that it's spinning at a particular speed, that our moon has a great deal to play in the gravitational pulls and in the oceanic currents that are absolutely required for life on this planet. So the more science delves into it, the more we learn about our physical earth and our physical universe, the more it points to God. The more it points to the fact that this was created, designed, and not only created and designed, but maintained by an invisible hand. Winston Churchill knew that, just by the circumstances and events that he had witnessed in his life. He said there's an unseen hand working out its purpose here below. He knew that. Was he an idiot? No, he was brilliant. Was he lost in fables? No, he was educated. But he seen and he declared what was very obvious to him. And that's the problem that we have today, is our vanity supersedes us, and evil men suppress the truth. And that's wrong. That's not right. Because in order for you to be healed, in order for you to function, you need to understand certain things. That there is a God in heaven, that he has designed us, and that he has certain requirements. But once we follow those requirements, then and only then can he finish the creation in us. And then and only then can we be realized our true potential and function at our capacity. Because we're not finished yet. We're not done. We're not done. We're walking through this world, experiencing what we're experiencing, having the power and authority to make decisions for ourselves, and the free will to be able to exercise that decision making. And that's important. The angels had that right as well. Some of them chose to do wrong. Thank goodness most of them chose to do what was right. So it says here in verse 5, in the heavens, or the latter part of verse 4, in the heavens he has pitched a tent for the sun. Look at the process of the sun, which is like a bridegroom coming forth from his pavilion when it rises. It's beautiful. People stay up to watch a sunrise, or a sunset. They love to observe its course because it can be inspirational and beautiful. And David here is saying it's like a bridegroom coming forth from his pavilion, his entourage, like a champion rejoicing to run his course. It rises at one end of the heavens and it makes its circuit. It makes its circuit, its timing, its purposeful intention and timing. It makes its circuit to the other. Nothing is hidden from its heat. It's not too hot and it's not too cold. And he says, the law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. The statutes of the Lord are trustworthy. These are things that live inside of you. Making wise the simple. What does that mean? The statutes of the Lord are trustworthy, making wise the simple. Wow. Really quickly here, we could turn to 1 Corinthians. What is that? Making wise the simple. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 26. Chapter 1, verse 26, and it says, and this is so wonderful because when we get puffed up or we think we have knowledge or we think that we're something else, Paul right away here is sobering and he reminds us, brothers, think of what you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many of you were influential. Not many of you were of noble birth. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. Verse 28, he chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things, right? The Pharisees asked Christ, why are you hanging out with these tax collectors and sinners? He chose the despised things and the things that are not, to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him. That's who he called. He called wretched, sinning people. Primarily, the bulk of who he called were these people. They weren't influential, they weren't born of noble birth, not many of them were wise by human standards, they were just common, everyday people. And here we read, the statutes of the Lord are trustworthy, making wise the simple. Well, what happens is your mind is renewed. You become something that you never could have become on your own. God is fashioned and making you into something. He's healing you. He's designing your mind. He's healing your heart. That's what he's doing. But we have to be doers. We have to understand who we are, wretched people. People that need his help. People that constantly call on our God to help us because we're so wretched. That's who he called. And Paul confirms that. David knew that. He says it right here. The statutes of the Lord are trustworthy, making wise the simple. Who was David? David was the youngest of a ton of other brothers. He was so far away from his father's inheritance, he wouldn't have gotten nothing. He was the youngest. He was the least of his brothers. He wasn't the oldest. And as each one of those brothers came before Samuel, Samuel looked at them and said, oh, this guy's tall, he's handsome, he's got to be the one that's going to be king. And God told him, no. I don't look on a man's appearance, I look on his heart. That's what makes him who I need him to be. His heart, not his appearance. So David was a shepherd boy out in the field. He was nobody. He understood that. And if his dad died, that stuff would have went to the oldest son back then. It wouldn't have went anywhere near him. He would have got slim pickings because he had all his brothers ahead of him. He was the youngest. He was the lowliest. He was the one who was nothing. And yet, look what God did to him. The precepts of the Lord are right, giving joy to the heart. This is the healing part. They heal you internally. And you don't even realize it, but they do. The commands of the Lord are radiant, giving light to the eyes. The fear of the Lord is pure, enduring forever. The ordinances of the Lord are sure and altogether righteous. They are more precious than gold, than much pure gold. They are sweeter than honey from the comb. By them is your servant warned. In keeping them, there is great reward. And then here's something very wise King David has been made aware of, because his mind has been fashioned in such a way where it has amazing capacity, and the Spirit is working with him. Here's what he says in verse 12. Who can discern his errors? Forgive my hidden faults. Keep your servant also from willful sins. He knew what was raging in him. He knew the battle that he was in. May they not rule over me. He knew he had to dig deep. He knew he had to lay that foundation on a rock. He knew that he couldn't even trust his own mind and his own heart. And that's what he's asking. Forgive my hidden faults. Faults that I don't even see I have. Look what happened when he took the wife of Uriah, Bathsheba. He didn't even realize what he did. He justified it to himself. And then he sent this righteous man who wouldn't even go home and sleep with his wife, but slept in the servants' quarters when he had summoned him, so that he could blame her pregnancy on him. And then he sent him to his death. He told Joab to withdraw, to assault the gates of the city, and then to withdraw and leave him there, so that when they came out to defend it, he was slaughtered, he was killed. What kind of a man does that? And yet when Nathan came to him, told him about the rich man who took the person's lamb, the only lamb they had, even one that ate at their own table like a pet, and David banged his hands on both sides of his chair and said, that guy is dead today. And Nathan turned around and told him, that man is you. You took the wife of your servant, a man that was faithful to you. and you murdered him, and you took her for yourself. Even in the light of such a heinous crime, such a dirty, rotten thing, David's heart prevailed when the torrent came. Because he had built that house on a rock, he was able to stand. And in that moment, he realized what he had done. And he said, oh my God. And he got down. And he humbled himself in front of the whole court. His heart won. And in that moment, when it was tested to the extreme, and when he had complete authority to have this man killed, how dare you speak to me like that? It was not his attitude. He humbled himself in front of the whole court, and he said it out loud, I've sinned against you and only you. Do with me as you will. He knew what he was. And we need to keep coming back to this well over and over again, because we're wretched. Every one of us are rotten. Every one of us have the capacity to be so rotten, like David. And yet, when you look at how this man talked, when you look at what out in his heart, when you look at when he kept coming back again and again to his God, he dug deep. He overcame. All that he was washed away. He was able to stand. This is what we do on a yearly basis. This is why it's so important to employ what my brother was saying about measuring our heart. If we don't do that, we're finished. Because we're in a battle, and the biggest enemy that we're fighting is ourself. And it's rough. Because we want to go easy on ourselves. King David did. But when it was time to realize what he had done, he had enough stored up in him where he was able to withstand when that torrent came and visited him. And every year, this is a time of year when we need to bring that measuring of our hearts to a crescendo, to a peak, because of the respect we need to show when we renew our covenant. This is how we dig deep. This is how we lay the foundation on the rock, by renewing as much as we can our covenant on a good footing with Jesus Christ. That's what matters. Thank you.